Hi, I've got a short introductory video this week because you've got a lot of work to do in your life and also for this class. So I'm going to keep this short and maybe bittersweet because I'm talking about English. Not your favorite topic, perhaps. It's mine sometimes, if that helps. Probably doesn't help. Look, there's a couple things I'm asking you to do. One is to read a couple short articles, short chapters in this book that will hopefully kind of guide you through the other thing I'm asking you to do, which is a couple more parts of the paper that you're putting together, right? This is all of the homework, all of the journals, I'm hoping basically are the rough draft, or at least the raw material for the rough drafts of your paper that you're working on, your literary analysis paper. So, last week, you found hopefully a couple scholarly articles. I hope that you were able to navigate the library's databases. If not, let me know. I'm going through your summaries right now and taking a look, so I'll be sending you some feedback soon. Now that you have those articles, you've written up the summaries, right? Just the kind of like the basic facts, the basic position or interpretation of these articles, hopefully kind of very differing opinions about the meaning of your story. That's the idea, right? That you're jumping into this conversation and there's some disagreements or at least differences in emphasis about the meaning of the story that you've picked, and you're going to jump in, and this is the week that you dive into the conversation. So in my mind, it's the most kind of interesting week of the writing process because you get your say completely, right, and in detail. So the first thing I'm asking you to do is essentially write a brief evaluation of the two articles that you've already summarized, right? You're basically going to say, thumbs up on this one I agree with, thumbs down on this one that just made no dang sense at all. Or you could say, both of these interpretations have a valid point, but they're missing something really important. Let me fill in the blanks, right? Let me tell you what's really going on in this story. So wherever the conversation is going, you're basically going to evaluate. You're going to give kind of like your response to the two different positions. And that can be called an evaluation, right? Where you're just basically saying this is an effective interpretation or a convincing one, or it's not, and here's why. Or it's it could also be termed a synthesis, right? So on our paper assignment, I think I call this little section a synthesis, because basically you're making the connection between these two. These are in direct opposition to each other. One takes a interpretation this is completely realistic. This other one says it's completely metaphorical. The truth is a combination of those two things, right? Something like that, where you're synthesizing the information and maybe including your position. They're both half right, but the most interesting truth, the most interesting interpretation is this one. Or they're both so completely off track, it's obvious what the meaning of the story is. Let me fill you in. So that's the first little homework assignment, just a paragraph where you're basically kind of connecting the two things you've already written about separately in the two different summaries. So that's the kind of your response, your take on other people's interpretations of the story. The second half, the more interesting half, is your say. Now you're getting to the I say section. Here's my take, here's my interpretation. Let me explain to you the real meaning of this story, right? So you've already written out kind of your initial thoughts about the story. You did that a couple weeks ago. So you can go back to that work. In fact, it's probably a good idea to just kind of review what your first impressions were, because it might have changed, right? After reading, one good thing about reading the scholarly conversation is that now that you've read other people's opinions, it might have altered your first take on the meaning of that, whatever story you're writing about. It probably has. So there's that. There's also, I did some suggestions for another kind of free writing to help you focus on the meaning of the story, either through conflict or character or theme. Just some kind of questions to kind of get the mental wheels turning. It's not to be the free writing part is not to be turned in. That's just for you. If you just need to kind of write out until you discover what you yourself think about the story now that it's been in your head for a couple weeks. So that's a possibility. I also encourage you, actually, if you don't know yet what you actually think about the story, start looking for the interesting why questions, right? Because when you're writing about fiction, when you're writing about literature, usually of any kind, the what questions, what happened? You know, that's essentially the focus on plot, right? What this character did, what happens after this thing occurs, right? Those are plot questions, which can be interesting, especially if the author is playing around with chronological order or plot. It's the why questions that will help you write this paper, right? Why does a character react the way she does? Why does Connie open that door and walk out with Arnold Friend at the end of the story? Why does the grandmother reach out to the misfit at the end of this long conversation where she's basically trying to just save her life and she'll say anything? Why does she reach out in that last second before her death and say, why, you're one of my own babies? Is that a final attempt at manipulation? Is it a moment of epiphany where she suddenly realizes something about our common humanity? Or is it just the evidence of an old woman's mind finally kind of breaking, and she sees this man in front of her wearing her son's shirt, right? That ugly shirt with the parrots on it, and just is confused, right? If you can answer that why question, that might help you think about the meaning of that story. Why does Tim O'Brien obsessively tell these war stories over and over again when he says the truth, right? Why is he making a distinction between happening truth and story truth? Why does Mrs. Mallard, who we know as Louise Mallard, not Mrs., not only defined by her marital status, why does she die the second she sees that her husband is alive? Is it joy at that moment that kills her? Or is it the monstrous joy that she felt up in her room when she realized she's going to have a free life, a life full of her own choices, her own agency? Right? It's the why questions that lead us usually to the meaning of the stories. So if you get stuck, just start looking for things that seem a little strange or a little confusing and ask why. That might lead you to your interpretation of the story if you're still looking for it. There's also a little bit about thesis statements and how to do that when writing about literature in particular that I think will help, right? Remember, the writing process means that things will change as you go. Your opinion of the story, your interpretation of the story probably has changed. Same thing with a thesis statement. It's as you remember from earlier English classes, folks like me, English teachers, are going to go on and on about thesis statements and how important they are in a paper. And that's true. They help focus, they present to the reader the focus and the opinion being explored in the paper. But it can change during the writing process. But it's important to get a good one as soon as possible, even if you know you're going to be tinkering with it, altering it during the writing process. So there's a thing about thesis statements. And the final thing is the final homework is basically just having your say, Like, write your interpretation of the story. I put an example from Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? A paper written about Connie, explaining Connie's the end of the story and the end of Connie's life, according to this paper. I put that in just so you can see how someone approached that. And the idea of starting to pull evidence out of the story, right? Either through paraphrasing, pulling out details from the story and writing it in your own words, or actual directly quoting, pulling the words out of particular bits of dialogue or descriptions, taking those direct words and putting them in quotation marks and integrating it into your own writing. It's good to go ahead and start doing that, right? A convincing interpretation is always going to have evidence to support, to show. If you don't have that, you're just telling me something, as opposed to telling me and also showing me why what you're saying is right, right? So think of this as your chance to state your case to the juror, the reader, right? That your interpretation of this particular case, the mysterious case of Connie or the mysterious case of the grandmother, that your interpretation of this case is supported by the evidence, right? And every good lawyer is going to bring in the evidence to convince the juror or the reader the rightness of your case, right? The accuracy and believability of what you're laying out. So all of that's in there. Hopefully that will kind of help you put together the I say section, right? I can't wait to see what your take is, what your interpretation is of your chosen story. Anyway, I will have to wait a bit, but I'm looking forward to it. And I'll be sending you feedback on the homework that you did do recently. So that's all I've got this week. Work hard. Be kind. I'll see you back here next week. All right, take care.